Hey guys, tonight we are diving headfirst into a world of breathtaking, bone-chilling beauty. A realm where survival isn't just a skill, it's an art form perfected over millennia. Imagine, if you will, stepping out not into your familiar backyard, but into an immense landscape sculpted from frost and shadow, where the air itself feels like 1,000 tiny stinging needles against any exposed skin. The sun? Oh, that's become a rather distant, almost mythical memory. A pale rumour on the horizon for a few fleeting moments if you're lucky. This isn't your average picturesque winter wonderland, the kind you see on festive greeting cards. This is a place where the very earth seems to hold its breath, under a crushing blanket of white. And honestly, you probably won't survive this environment for more than a few hours without some serious time-tested ancestral knowledge. It's a reality check that puts our modern grumbles about a chilly commute into rather stark perspective. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to see where you're tuning in from, and what time it is in your corner of the world. Drop it in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing on the edge of an almost boundless expanse, a frozen desert stretching further than your eyes can comprehend. The light is peculiar. It's the heart of the long Arctic winter, and for weeks, perhaps months, the sun has been nothing more than a rumour, a faint blush on the southern horizon that barely musters the energy to announce a fleeting twilight. Instead, the world is bathed in the ethereal glow of the moon when it graces the sky and the shimmering, dancing curtains of the aurora borealis. These celestial lights paint the snows in hues of green, pink and violet, a silent, cosmic ballet performed for an audience of silent, stoic mountains and the vast, frozen ocean. It's a beauty so profound, so otherworldly, it almost makes you forget the gnawing cold that's already seeping into your core, despite the layers you thought were adequate. You quickly realise that adequate is a word with a very different meaning here. The silence is another thing altogether, is not just quiet, it's a silence so deep, so absolute, it feels like a physical presence. Sometimes it's broken by the mournful howl of the wind, a living entity that scours the landscape, piling snow into fantastic sculpted drifts, or polishing the sea ice until it gleams like black obsidian. Other times, you might hear the sharp crack of ice adjusting itself out on the frozen sea, a sound like distant rifle fire, reminding you that even the seemingly solid ground beneath your feet is in constant subtle motion. But mostly, it's a silence that presses in, amplifying the sound of your own heartbeat in your ears, the crunch of your boots on the crystalline snow. It's the kind of silence that forces introspection, that strips away the trivialities of a life lived further south. And it is cold. Not just chilly, not just wrap-up warm cold. This is a cold that feels ancient, elemental. It bites at any exposed skin with an intensity that's shocking, quickly numbing your cheeks, your nose, the tips of your ears. Your breath plumes out in front of you, a white cloud that crystallizes almost instantly on your eyelashes, your eyebrows, the fur trim of your hood, if you are so wisely equipped. You learn very quickly to breathe through a scarf or a ruff, lest the frigid air sear your lungs. This relentless cold is the omnipresent companion, the constant adversary, the defining characteristic of this world. It dictates everything: movement, thought, survival. Some early European explorers, accustomed to more temperate climes, found it almost impossible to believe that human societies could flourish here. They often described the Arctic as a desolate, uninhabitable wasteland. Yet, flourish they did. You look around, and the landscape at first glance might seem monotonous. White meeting a darker sky, punctuated by the occasional stark silhouette of a pressure ridge or a distant ice-shrouded peak. But your eyes begin to adjust to pick out the subtle nuances, the different textures of snow, the soft powdery drift, the hard wind-packed slab, the varying shades of white from brilliant diamond dust sparkle under moonlight to the dull matte grey of an overcast pre-dawn. You start to notice the almost imperceptible tracks of an Arctic fox, a delicate tracery across a snowdrift, or the heavier, more purposeful prints of a polar bear. a stark reminder that you are not the apex predator here, not by a long shot. Out here, you're just another warm-blooded creature trying to keep the precious spark of life from being extinguished by the overwhelming indifferent cold. It's a humbling thought, isn't it? Especially when you consider your central heating back home is probably set to a balmy 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and you still sometimes feel a bit nippy. The sheer scale of it all is designed to make you feel small, insignificant. And yet, for thousands of years, people have called this formidable environment home. The Inuit and their ancestors, the Thule people, didn't just survive here, they thrived. They developed a culture, a technology, and a profound understanding of this frozen world that allowed them to live in balance with its brutal demands. Historians still argue whether the remarkable Thule expansion across the Arctic, starting around 1000 AD, was primarily driven by a changing climate that opened up new hunting grounds, or by the pursuit of resources like bowhead whales. Whatever the precise impetus, their journey is a testament to human adaptability. They didn't have Gore-Tex or thermal underwear or GPS. They had knowledge, passed down through generations, and an ingenuity born of absolute necessity. They knew how to read the ice, how to predict the weather from the faintest signs, how to find sustenance where a southerner would see only barren emptiness. And crucially, they knew how to create shelter, warmth, and community in the heart of the polar night, using the very material that defined their world, snow. The idea that snow, the epitome of cold, could be transformed into a warm, life-sustaining refuge is perhaps one of the most elegant paradoxes of human invention. It's like discovering that water can be used to build a fireproof house. It just doesn't seem to compute, yet it's brilliantly true. This stark, beautiful, and unforgiving land is the crucible in which the Qaggiq, the snow house, was perfected. And you're about to understand just how vital that domed silhouette against the aurora-lit sky truly was, and it's into this very crucible that the ancestors of the people you now know as the Inuit stepped, not with trepidation, but with a profound inherited wisdom. The word Inuit itself simply means the people in their language, inuktitut, a quiet statement of belonging, of being intrinsically part of this immense icy tapestry. They are the descendants of the Thule people, who, as we touched upon, undertook a remarkable expansion across the Arctic from Alaska to Greenland around 1,000 years ago. Before the Thule, there were other cultures, like the Dorset, who also possessed an incredible ability to wrest life from the frozen land and sea. Archaeologists and anthropologists continue to debate the precise nature of the transition from Dorset to Thule culture, whether it was a case of displacement, assimilation, or a more complex interplay of factors. What is clear is that these were people not just passing through, but deeply, inextricably woven into the fabric of the cryosphere, the parts of the Earth's surface where water is in solid form. Imagine living a life where your every sense is constantly attuned to the subtle language of snow and ice. You don't just see white, you see 100 different whites, each telling a story. The blue tinge of old, compacted ice safe to walk on, the sugary sparkle of newly fallen powder that might hide treacherous hollows, the grey rubbery look of young sea ice too thin to bear your weight. You learn to listen to the ice groaning, cracking and booming, interpreting its sounds like a seasoned sailor reads the moods of the open ocean. Your nose can detect the faint, oily scent of a seal's breathing hole from a surprising distance, or the subtle change in the air that presages an incoming storm. This isn't just knowledge, it's an embodied intelligence, a way of being in the world that is almost unimaginable to those of us who navigate by street signs and weather apps. It's like they had a built-in advanced weather forecasting system, probably more accurate than the one on your phone that confidently predicted sunshine right before that downpour last Tuesday. Their resilience is legendary, born not of brute force, but of ingenious adaptability and a profound respect for the forces of nature. They understood that you don't fight the Arctic, you learn to move with it, to understand its rhythms and to harness its austere bounty. This philosophy permeated every aspect of their lives, from their social structures to their spiritual beliefs. Cooperation wasn't just a nice idea, it was the bedrock of survival. A lone hunter, no matter how skilled, was vulnerable, but a group sharing knowledge, resources and the burdens of the hunt could thrive. If a hunter was successful, the catch was shared throughout the community, ensuring that everyone had a chance to make it through the lean times. This intricate web of reciprocity and obligation was as vital as any tool or shelter. Think about that next time you're sharing your Wi-Fi password with a neighbour. A vital resource in modern times, but perhaps not quite on the same life or death scale. Their material culture was a masterclass in making the most of what little the environment offered. Every part of a hunted animal was used. Meat for food, obviously. Fur and skins for clothing, tents and boat coverings, sewn with incredible precision using sinew for thread and fine bone needles. The traditional Inuit parka, with its sunburst ruff of wolverine or wolf fur around the hood, is a marvel of thermal engineering, designed to create a pocket of warm air around the face and prevent frostbite. Wolverine fur was particularly prized because it doesn't frost up as easily from breath moisture. Bones and ivory were carved into tools, harpoon heads, needles, toggles, and even intricate artwork and game pieces. Even the blubber, the fat from seals and whales, was precious, providing fuel for the all-important Qulliq, the soapstone lamp that was the heart of warmth and light in their homes. But we'll get more into that lifesaver later. One rather ingenious adaptation was the creation of snow goggles, traditionally crafted from bone, ivory, or wood. These weren't sunglasses in the modern sense. They were opaque, with narrow horizontal slits cut into them. This design drastically reduced the amount of light reaching the eyes, preventing the intensely painful condition of snow blindness, caused by the glare of the sun on vast expanses of snow. It's a brilliantly simple solution to a serious Arctic hazard, a sort of prehistoric Oakley, if you will. Their connection to the animal world was profound and deeply spiritual. Animals were not seen as mere resources, but as other beings, powerful and intelligent, deserving of respect. Success in hunting often depended on observing proper rituals and showing gratitude lest the animal spirits be offended and withhold their bounty. Shamans, or Qaggiq, played a crucial role in mediating between the human and spirit worlds, healing the sick, divining the location of game, and ensuring the spiritual well-being of the community. These beliefs provided a framework for understanding a world that could often seem capricious and overwhelmingly powerful. Historians still argue whether the elaborate Sedna myth, the powerful goddess of the sea animals, was a pan-Inuit belief or had more regional variations in its earliest forms, but her story underscores the critical importance of marine mammals to their existence. Consider the sheer tenacity required. For generations they faced conditions that would make most of us give up and book the first flight to somewhere, anywhere, warmer. Yet they developed sophisticated hunting techniques, like waiting patiently for hours, sometimes days, by a seal's breathing hole in the sea ice, armed with a harpoon, in temperatures that would freeze exposed flesh in minutes. They built swift kayaks, Qaggiq, for hunting seals and walrus in the summer waters, and larger umiaks for transporting families and goods, or for whaling. Their knowledge of animal behaviour was encyclopedic, passed down through oral tradition, through stories and songs, and through direct experience from childhood. A child learned to hunt by observing, by mimicking, by gradually taking on more responsibility. There were no schools in the way we understand them. The land itself was the classroom, and the lessons were often life or death. This intimate, almost symbiotic relationship with their environment is what allowed them to see the potential in a substance most of us associate with snowball fights and ski slopes. They saw in the frozen, crystalline water not an enemy, but an ally, a building material of surprising versatility and strength. They understood its insulative properties, its structural possibilities. It was this deep, lived understanding that led to the creation of the Igloo, the snow house. It wasn't just a shelter, it was a manifestation of their genius, a testament to their ability to transform the very essence of winter's harshness into a haven of warmth and life. And it's this transformation, this Arctic alchemy, that we're slowly spiralling towards, much like the blocks of an igloo wall. Now let's talk about snow. Yes, snow. That fluffy white stuff you might curse when it blocks your driveway, or perhaps joyfully greet when it means a day off school or work. For the Inuit, however, snow was far more than an inconvenience or a plaything. It was a fundamental element of their existence, a resource of profound importance, and, somewhat paradoxically, the very key to warmth and survival during the long, dark winters. It To understand the igloo, you first have to understand the peculiar, almost magical properties of snow itself. It's not just frozen water, it's a remarkably complex and versatile material. Think of it. The difference between a snowman that slumps sadly in the afternoon sun and one that stands proud for weeks is all down to the type of snow. The secret to snow's ability to insulate lies in its structure. Freshly fallen snow, especially the light, fluffy kind, is composed of countless tiny ice crystals, all intricately branched and delicate. Between these crystals are trapped vast quantities of air. In fact, new snow can be up to 90 to 95% trapped air. And as you might remember from a science class somewhere in your past, or maybe from one of those survival shows where they bury themselves in a snowdrift to avoid freezing, air is a fantastic insulator, especially when it's still and trapped in small pockets. It's the same principle behind a down jacket or a fiberglass bat in your attic walls. The material itself isn't inherently warm, but it's excellent at preventing the transfer of heat. So, a thick layer of snow acts like a cozy blanket, trapping the heat generated inside a shelter, whether that heat comes from a human body, a lamp, or even just the latent warmth of the earth below. You might be thinking, but snow is cold. How can it keep you warm? It's a perfectly reasonable question. The snow itself is indeed at or below freezing point. However, its power lies in its ability to slow down the rate at which warmth escapes. Inside an igloo, the inhabitants' body heat and the small flame of a Qulliq, that seal oil lamp we'll keep coming back to, gently warm the interior air. The snow walls, packed densely, prevent this warmed air from easily escaping out into the frigid minus 40 degrees Celsius or Fahrenheit, it's pretty much the same at that point, exterior. At the same time, those same snow walls prevent the bitter outside cold from penetrating inwards. It's a thermal standoff, and snow is the surprisingly effective referee. The thicker and denser the snow walls, the better the insulation. It's a bit like wearing multiple thin layers of clothing on a cold day. Each layer traps air and contributes to the overall warmth. Of course, not all snow is created equal when it comes to building. The light, fluffy powder that makes for great skiing is terrible for constructing an igloo. It has no structural integrity. It would be like trying to build a house out of cotton candy. The Inuit knew that the ideal snow for igloo construction was snow that had been compacted and hardened by the wind, and then allowed to sinter. Sintering is a fascinating process where individual ice crystals, under pressure and over time, begin to bond together, forming a more solid, cohesive mass. Wind-packed snow on the Arctic tundra, or the sea ice, often undergoes this transformation naturally, creating large drifts of firm, cuttable snow. This is the good stuff, the snow with enough tensile strength to be carved into sturdy blocks that won't crumble under their own weight or the stress of construction. The Inuit had, and still have, an incredibly nuanced vocabulary for snow, with dozens, if not hundreds, of words to describe its different states and qualities, words that have no direct equivalent in English. For example, Qaggiq refers to the crystalline, powdery snow at the very bottom of a snowpack, often found near the ground, which is loose and sugary. Useless for building, but important for animals like lemmings to burrow in. Then there's anniu, the hard, compacted snow suitable for igloo blocks. The ability to read the snow, to find these patches of anniu, was a critical skill. An experienced builder would test the snow with a snow probe, a long, slender rod, often made of bone or antler, feeling for the right consistency and depth. They could tell by the resistance the probe met whether the snow was too soft, too crusty, or just right. It's a sensory skill honed over a lifetime, a bit like a chef knowing the exact moment dough is perfectly kneaded just by its feel. One quirky tidbit is that some hunters believed that certain types of snow sang or spoke when conditions were right for building, a subtle hum or creak that indicated its readiness. Whether this was purely a poetic interpretation, or based on audible physical changes in the snowpack as it settled and sintered, is something ethnographers find intriguing. Furthermore, the temperature of the snow itself plays a role. Snow that is too cold, say below minus 20 degrees Celsius, can become very brittle and difficult to work with. Snow that is too warm, close to its melting point, will be wet and heavy, and an igloo built from it might be prone to dripping or even collapsing. The sweet spot is snow that is cold enough to be firm and dry, but not so cold that it shatters when cut. Understanding these thermal properties was just as important as understanding the structural ones. Historians still argue whether the precise techniques for selecting and cutting snow blocks varied significantly across different Inuit regions, or if there was a more universally adopted methodology driven by the consistent physics of snow. The very act of building with snow also has an interesting effect on the material. As blocks are cut and placed, the slight compression and the subtle melting and refreezing at the contact points, caused by the pressure and a tiny bit of heat from handling, help to weld the blocks together. The structure actually becomes stronger as it settles, and as a thin layer of meltwater on the interior surface caused by the warmth inside refreezes and glazes the walls, making them more airtight and reflective. It's a dynamic material, constantly interacting with the forces acting upon it. You are essentially creating a monolithic structure where each block becomes an integral part of the whole, much stronger than the sum of its individual parts. It's this deep, almost intuitive grasp of snow physics that allowed the Inuit to turn winter's defining feature into their greatest architectural asset. They didn't just conquer the snow, they partnered with it. And it's this partnership that we'll explore as we start to lay the very first blocks of our conceptual igloo. So, you found your perfect patch of wind-hardened sintered snow, that anniu we just talked about. The conditions are right, the snow probe has given you the green light, and now it's time to contemplate the sheer genius of the igloo's design. It's not just a random pile of snow blocks, it's a sophisticated piece of engineering, a self-supporting dome that derives incredible strength from its shape and the precise way it's assembled. The iconic image of the igloo is so familiar, yet few of us pause to consider the physics and architectural brilliance packed into that hemisphere of white. Forget your preconceived notions of a crude, temporary hut. This is architecture at its most elemental and effective. The fundamental shape of an igloo is a catenary-dome. Now, don't let the fancy term scare you. A catenary is simply the curve that an idealized hanging chain or cable assumes under its own weight when supported only at its ends. If you flip that curve upside down, you get an incredibly strong arch structure, one that directs all the compressive forces downwards and outwards, effectively cancelling them out and creating a stable, self-supporting form. Think of the graceful arches in ancient Roman aqueducts or Gothic cathedrals. They often incorporate catenary principles. The dome of an igloo uses this same principle but extends it into 3 dimensions. This shape is inherently stable because it's primarily under compression, and snow, especially well-compacted snow, is surprisingly strong under compression. It's much weaker under tension, being pulled apart, which is why you can't just make a flat roof out of snow blocks. It would collapse. The dome shape cleverly avoids putting the snow under significant tensile stress. It's a design that's both elegant and incredibly efficient, maximising enclosed volume while minimising surface area, which also helps to conserve heat. You know, it's a bit like how an egg is surprisingly strong when you squeeze it end to end. The curved shape distributes the pressure. The construction process itself, which we'll delve into more deeply soon, involves cutting blocks and arranging them in an inward-leaning spiral. This spiralling, imbricated, overlapping like tiles on a roof, pattern is crucial. Each new block rests partially on the block below it, and also leans against the previously laid block in the same course. This creates a continuous rising ramp of snow that gradually curves inwards to form the dome. It's a bit like building a snail shell from the inside out. This method ensures that, even during construction, the structure is largely self-supporting. There's no need for internal scaffolding or supports, which would be impractical in a remote treeless environment. The builder works from within the footprint of the igloo, essentially building their shelter around themselves. The size of an igloo could vary considerably, depending on its purpose and the number of people it needed to house. A small temporary hunting igloo might be only 6 or 7 feet in diameter, built quickly by a lone hunter or a pair. A larger family igloo could be 12 to 15 feet across, comfortably housing a family for weeks or even months. There are even historical accounts, and some archaeological evidence, of very large ceremonial igloos, or Qaggiq, sometimes constructed by joining several smaller igloos together, or by building one massive dome, capable of holding dozens of people for feasts, dances, and social gatherings. Building such a large snow structure would have required immense skill and cooperation. Imagine the community effort, everyone contributing their knowledge and labour to create a temporary snow coliseum. It boggles the mind. One fascinating aspect of the design is its adaptability. The basic domed structure is the core, but variations and additions were common. Entrance tunnels, for example, were a key feature. These weren't just simple holes. They were carefully designed to be lower than the main living floor. This created a natural cold trap. Cold air, being denser, would settle in the tunnel and stay there, preventing drafts and helping to keep the warmer air inside the main dome from escaping. The entrance often had a U-shape or a downward slope leading into the igloo, further enhancing this effect. Sometimes a porch or storage area would be built as a smaller dome, or lean-to attached to the main igloo, providing space for storing gear, meat, or for butchering animals out of the wind. Some igloos even had a window, often made from a clear piece of freshwater ice, which is usually clearer than sea ice, or a translucent piece of stretched seal gut, set into the wall to allow some natural light in during the twilight days. A quirky historical fact. Some early ethnographers reported that in certain regions, a piece of caribou shoulder blade scraped thin until it was almost translucent was occasionally used as a makeshift window pane. The orientation of the igloo relative to the prevailing winds was also an important consideration. Ideally, the entrance would be placed on the leeward side, away from the direct blast of the wind to minimise drafts and snow accumulation around the doorway. The Inuit were master observers of their environment, and this included understanding wind patterns and snowdrift formation. They knew how to use the landscape to their advantage, sometimes building in the lee of a small hill or a large snowdrift for extra protection. Historians still argue whether the precise angle of the igloo walls or the specific ratio of height to diameter was a matter of strict tradition, or allowed for more individual builder discretion based on snow conditions and intended use. What is certain is that the design was not arbitrary. It was the result of generations of trial, error, and refinement. The beauty of the igloo's blueprint lies in its simplicity and its perfect suitability to the available materials and environmental conditions. It's a structure that could be built relatively quickly, using only snow and a few simple tools, and yet it provided a secure and remarkably warm refuge against the deadliest of Arctic storms. It's a testament to the idea that sometimes the most elegant solutions are born from the most stringent constraints. No steel, no concrete, no advanced manufacturing, just snow, skill, and an intimate understanding of natural principles. This wasn't just folk architecture. This was sophisticated environmental design, centuries before such a term even existed. It's like the ultimate minimalist housing, but with life or death stakes. And as you stand there, snow knife in hand, figuratively speaking for now, you're about to become a part of this ancient tradition of transforming frozen breath into a haven of life. Now that you've grasped the architectural genius behind the igloo's domed design, the next critical step is the quest for the perfect building material. You can't just scoop up any old snow, as we've touched upon. Your life, quite literally, depends on finding snow with the right character, that firm, cohesive anniu that can be cut into robust blocks. This search isn't a haphazard affair, it's a deliberate, skilled process, a kind of snowy prospecting that requires keen observation and a tactile understanding of the winter landscape. Imagine yourself scanning the undulating white plains, your eyes seeking out the subtle clues that point to suitable snow deposits. What are you looking for? You're searching for drifts, large accumulations of snow sculpted and packed by the wind, but not just any drift. A freshly formed drift made of soft, powdery snow is no good. It needs time to settle, to age, to undergo that magical transformation called sintering, where the individual snow crystals bond together. This process is driven by temperature gradients within the snowpack and the pressure of overlying snow. Over days and weeks, the snow compacts and hardens, its internal structure changing from a loose collection of flakes into a more homogeneous, almost felt-like mass. You're looking for snow that has a uniform consistency, without too many layers of ice or soft sugary snow, Qaggiq, in between. These inconsistencies can create weak points in your igloo blocks. The ideal location for finding this construction-grade snow is often on the windward side of gentle slopes, or in areas where the wind has scoured the surface and then redeposited the snow in dense, even drifts. Sometimes, the middle of a large, flat, exposed area, like a frozen lake or the sea ice itself, will have extensive patches of perfectly wind-packed snow. You learn to read the texture of the snow surface. A very smooth, almost polished surface might indicate snow that is too hard, almost like ice, which would be difficult to cut and shape. A surface that is too soft and fluffy is obviously out. You're looking for a firm, matte finish, perhaps with subtle, wind-etched ripples called sastrugi, which often indicate well-compacted snow beneath. It's a bit like a baker looking for dough that's perfectly proofed. There's a certain look, a certain feel that tells you it's ready. To confirm your visual assessment, you'd use a snow probe, traditionally a long, thin rod of caribou antler, bone, or sometimes driftwood if available. You push the probe down into the snowdrift, feeling for resistance. This is where the real skill comes in. An experienced igloo builder can tell an astonishing amount about the snowpack just from the way the probe slides in. Is the resistance consistent all the way down? This indicates uniform snow, which is good. Does it suddenly punch through a soft layer? That's a bad sign, as blocks cut from this area might fracture. Does it hit a hard, icy crust? This could make cutting difficult or result in blocks that are too brittle. You're feeling for that sweet spot. A firm, consistent resistance that tells you the snow is dense enough to hold its shape, but not so hard that it's unworkable. The probe also tells you the depth of the suitable snow. You need blocks of a certain thickness, so the drift has to be deep enough. Trying to build an igloo from shallow snow would be like trying to make a brick wall with only half bricks, frustrating and ineffective. Some Inuit hunters developed an almost uncanny ability to find good snow. There's a quirky tidbit about some old hunters claiming they could even smell good building snow, or that their joints would ache in a particular way when they were near a prime drift. While perhaps more folklore than science, it speaks to the incredibly deep multi-sensory connection these individuals had with their environment. Modern science tells us that snow density for igloo building should ideally be around 0.3 to 0.4 grams per cubic centimetre. For comparison, fresh powder snow can be as low as 0.05 grams per cubic centimetre, while glacial ice is around 0.9 grams per cubic centimetre. The Inuit didn't have density meters, of course. They had centuries of accumulated knowledge passed down through observation and practice. Once a promising drift is located, you might dig a small test pit, or calli, to visually inspect the snow layers and confirm the probe's findings. You'd look at the crystal structure, the cohesion. Can you cut a small test block, and does it hold together well? Does it have that slight squeak when you cut it, the sound of well-bonded crystals? This meticulous preparatory work is vital. Rushing this stage and choosing poor quality snow could mean a weak igloo, one that collapses mid-construction, or worse, in the middle of a blizzard when you need its shelter most. It's the Arctic equivalent of a building inspector checking the foundation before the walls go up. Except you're both the inspector and the builder, and the penalty for error is far more severe than a stop work order. It's a chilling thought, isn't it? The idea that your survival hinges on your ability to correctly interpret the subtle language of a snowdrift. Historians still argue whether the knowledge of finding perfect snow was a universally shared skill among all adult Inuit, or if it was more the domain of specialists, particularly skilled hunters or elders, who had built many igloos in their lifetime. Given the importance of the igloo for winter survival, especially for hunting parties, it's likely that most men, at least, had a working knowledge of snow selection, even if some were more adept than others. This process of finding the right snow wasn't just a chore. It was an integral part of the rhythm of Arctic life, a necessary prelude to the creation of warmth and community. It's another example of how deeply intertwined their lives were with the nuances of their frozen world. They didn't just live on the snow, they lived with it, understood its moods, its strengths and its weaknesses, and finding that perfect patch of anniu was the first triumphant note in the symphony of igloo construction. Only then could the real artistry begin. Having successfully prospected your perfect patch of wind-compacted anniu, the kind of snow that whispers promises of structural integrity, you now face the task of shaping it. This isn't a job for bare hands or makeshift tools. It requires specialised implements honed by generations of Arctic ingenuity. The primary tool for cutting igloo blocks is the snow knife, or Pana. And when you picture this, don't imagine a sleek stainless steel blade from a modern kitchen. Traditional panet were crafted from materials wrested from the very environment they helped to conquer. Bone, antler, ivory, and occasionally even stone or driftwood when available. Imagine holding one of these tools, a long, relatively thin blade, perhaps 15 to 30 inches in length, sometimes slightly curved, designed not for chopping, but for slicing cleanly through dense snow. The material itself tells a story. A Pana made from a caribou antler tine would have a certain flex and resilience. One carved from walrus ivory would be harder, heavier, capable of holding a sharper, though perhaps more brittle edge. Sometimes sections of polar bear femur or other large bones were used. The handle would be shaped for a firm grip, even with mittened hands, and might be wrapped in sealskin thongs for better purchase. These weren't mass-produced items. Each Pana was a personal tool, often made by its user or a skilled craftsman within the community, perfectly balanced and suited to their strength and technique. It was an extension of the builder's arm, a key that unlocked the structural potential hidden within the snow. The edge of the Pana didn't need to be razor-sharp like a hunting knife. Its effectiveness came from its shape, and the sawing motion used to cut the blocks. Think more along the lines of a very efficient bread knife, designed to slice without compressing or tearing. Maintaining the Pana was also important. Bone and ivory can dull or chip, so the edge would need to be periodically resharpened or smoothed, perhaps by rubbing it against a suitable stone or another piece of bone. A quirky fact is that some Inuit groups historically, before widespread contact with Europeans introduced metal, would sometimes use a Pana made of meteoric iron, if a meteorite fragment was found. These rare sky iron knives were highly prized for their durability. Alongside the Pana, another important tool, though perhaps less iconic, was the snow shovel or scoop, called a Qulliq or Qulliq in some dialects. These weren't the broad metal shovels you might use to clear your driveway. Traditional snow shovels were often crafted from a single piece of driftwood, if a suitably sized piece could be found, or pieced together from sections of antler, bone, like a caribou shoulder blade, or even tough hardened sealskin stretched over a frame. The primary purpose of the snow shovel wasn't for cutting blocks, but for clearing away loose snow from the building site, for excavating the igloo's interior down to a lower level, to create the cold trap and sleeping platforms, and for chinking any gaps between the blocks with soft snow once the dome was up. It was the workhorse tool for moving larger quantities of snow that didn't require the precision of the Pana. Consider the resourcefulness involved. In an environment largely devoid of trees, metal ores, or easily workable stone, the Inuit turned to the animal kingdom for their raw materials. The very creatures they hunted for sustenance also provided the means to build their shelters. There's a profound cyclical relationship here. The walrus, whose ivory might form a Pana, was hunted from a kayak made of sealskin stretched over a bone or driftwood frame, by a hunter kept warm in caribou furs, who would then use the ivory pani to build a snow house to shelter his family while they consumed the walrus meat. It's a closed loop of survival, where nothing is wasted and everything has a purpose. It makes our modern reliance on hardware stores and global supply chains seem almost laughably complex, and perhaps a little bit fragile in comparison, doesn't it? The use of these traditional tools required considerable skill and physical exertion. Cutting snow blocks all day in sub-zero temperatures is demanding work. The builder needed stamina, precision, and an understanding of how the snow would behave under the blade of the Pana. Each cut had to be clean and straight to ensure the blocks would fit together snugly. Angled cuts, beveled edges. These were all part of the technique, executed with tools that might seem primitive to our eyes, but were perfectly adapted to their task. Historians still argue whether the design of snow knives and shovels showed significant regional variation reflecting local material, availability and specific snow conditions, or if a generally optimal design had diffused across most Inuit groups. Imagine the scene, a lone figure, or perhaps two, silhouetted against the vast pale expanse of the Arctic. The only sounds are the rhythmic swish-shush of the Pana slicing through the snow, the occasional grunt of effort and the ever-present moan of the wind. There's a focused intensity to the work, a deep concentration. This isn't just construction, it's a ritual, a dialogue with the elements. The tools, born from the land itself, become conduits for the builder's knowledge and intent, transforming a featureless snowdrift into the walls of a life-sustaining home. It's a far cry from a power saw and a nail gun, yet the result, shelter, security, warmth, is just as vital, if not more so. These ivory and bone implements, seemingly humble, were the keys to unlocking the Arctic's most abundant building resource, allowing the Inuit to literally carve their homes out of the winter. And with these tools in hand, the true architecture of the igloo could begin to rise. With your perfect snow selected and your trusty Pana in hand, you are now ready to begin the almost magical process of raising the igloo walls. This isn't about stacking blocks like bricks in a straight line, it's about initiating a graceful inward curving spiral, a continuous ramp of snow that will define the dome's elegant strength. The first step is to mark out the circular footprint of your intended igloo on the surface of the compacted snowdrift. This is often done by the builder standing in the centre and using a length of sealskin thong, or even the Pana itself, held at a consistent distance, to scribe a circle in the snow as they pivot. The diameter will depend on the planned size of the igloo, from a snug hunter's shelter to a more spacious family dwelling. Once the circle is defined, the real artistry begins with the cutting of the foundation blocks. This is where the ramp starts. The builder makes a long, sloping cut downwards into the snow, following the curve of the scribed circle, and then begins to cut the first blocks from within this trench. These initial blocks are not uniform rectangles. The first block will be uniquely shaped, with one end cut at an angle to initiate the upward slope. Subsequent blocks in this first course will also have their tops angled slightly, so that as they are placed edge to edge around the circle, they form a gentle, continuous ramp rising from the base. This is absolutely crucial. If you just laid a flat ring of blocks, you'd have a hard time getting the next layer to lean inwards correctly. The ramp is the secret to the spiral. You, the builder, are typically working from inside the circle, quarrying the blocks from the snow around your feet, or from the area immediately inside the igloo's intended footprint. This is efficient. The building material is right there, and as you remove snow to make blocks, you're simultaneously excavating the interior floor of the igloo, often lowering it below the original snow surface level. This lowered floor will later become part of the cold trap system we discussed. So you're essentially digging yourself down as you build the walls up and around you. It's a bit like being a very organised mole creating its burrow. As you cut each block with your Pana, you're aiming for dimensions roughly 2 feet long, 1.5 feet high, and about 6 to 8 inches thick, though this can vary depending on snow quality and the size of the igloo. The blocks need to be sturdy enough to handle, but not so heavy that they are unwieldy. Each block is carefully lifted and placed onto the rising ramp of the previous course. The fitting is key. The edges of the blocks are often slightly beveled or shaved with the Pana to ensure a tight fit against their neighbours. Any significant gaps would compromise the structure's integrity and insulation. You'd use the Pana to trim and shape, ensuring each block nestles perfectly against the one before it, and leans inward at just the right angle. This inward lean is critical. As the spiral ascends, each new block is tilted slightly more inwards than the one below it. This is what creates the dome's curve. It's not done with a protractor or a level. It's done by eye, by feel, by the experienced builder's intuitive understanding of the geometry. Too much lean too early, and the dome will be too small and steep. Too little lean, and it will be too wide and shallow, potentially risking collapse. It's a delicate balance, learned through practice. The overlapping, or imbrication, of the blocks, where each block rests on the one below and also leans against the one previously laid in the same spiral course, adds to the stability during construction. It's like a 3-dimensional jigsaw puzzle, where you're also inventing the pieces as you go. A quirky construction detail often mentioned is that the builder would lick their mitten and rub it along the edge of a block to create a thin film of moisture that would quickly freeze, helping to glue the block to its neighbours. Instant snow cement. The process has a certain rhythm to it. Cut, lift, place, trim, check the angle. Cut, lift, place, trim, check. The builder moves methodically, spiralling upwards with the wall. If working alone, the builder is inside. If 2 people are building, one might work inside, placing the blocks, while the other works outside, cutting and passing the blocks in. This teamwork can significantly speed up the process. A small hunting igloo could be erected by a skilled builder in as little as an hour or 2. A larger family igloo might take several hours, or even the better part of a day, depending on snow conditions and the number of helpers. Considering you're building a fully functional insulated house from scratch in that time, it's remarkably efficient. Try putting up a flat-pack shed from a certain Swedish store in that time frame, and you'll appreciate the igloo's swiftness even more. As the walls rise higher and curve further inwards, the builder has to be increasingly careful. The blocks are now being placed overhead. The skill lies in maintaining the integrity of the spiral and ensuring each block is well supported by those below and beside it. The snow itself is your ally here. The slight compression and the friction between the blocks help to hold them in place. And remember, the whole structure is predominantly in compression. Historians still argue whether the direction of the spiral, clockwise or counterclockwise, had any significance or was simply a matter of the builder's preference or handedness. Some anecdotal accounts suggest one direction might have been considered luckier, but concrete evidence is scarce. This methodical, spiralling ascent continues block by snowy block until only a small opening remains at the very top of the dome. The walls have gracefully curved inwards, enclosing a space that is already noticeably calmer and quieter than the windswept world outside. You are now standing inside a nearly completed sphere of white, a testament to your skill and the remarkable properties of snow. The air inside, even without a lamp yet, feels different, shielded. The light filtering through the snow walls gives the interior an ethereal, luminous quality. All that remains is the most critical piece of the puzzle, the keystone. The walls have spiraled gracefully upwards and inwards, a testament to your careful cutting and placement. You're now standing inside an almost complete dome of snow, the light filtering through the white walls, creating a soft, diffused glow. The wind, which may have been howling outside just moments ago, is now a muted whisper. But the structure isn't quite finished. There's a hole at the very apex of the dome, perhaps a couple of feet across, an opening to the sky. This is where the final, crucial block will go, the keystone. In arch architecture, a keystone is the wedge-shaped stone at the apex of an arch, locking all the other stones into position. The Igloo's keystone block, though made of humble snow, serves an equally vital structural role. It completes the dome, distributing the stresses and making the entire structure self-supporting and incredibly strong. Placing this keystone is arguably the most delicate and skilled part of the entire igloo construction process. The builder, still working from inside the nearly completed dome, must carefully measure and cut a final block to fit this apical opening precisely. This block isn't a simple rectangle like most of the wall blocks. It needs to be shaped almost like a plug, often slightly larger on its outer surface and tapering inwards, so that once it's manoeuvred into place, it will wedge itself firmly against the surrounding blocks of the uppermost spiral. There's no room for error here. A poorly fitting keystone could compromise the entire dome. If it's too small, it will fall through. If it's too large, it won't fit or might stress the surrounding blocks unduly. The builder often cuts this keystone block from a suitable piece of snow outside the igloo, or from a large chunk specifically reserved for this purpose. They will then bring it inside. Now comes the tricky part, lifting this carefully shaped block into position overhead and easing it into the opening. Imagine trying to fit a precise plug into a hole directly above your head, working in relatively cramped conditions, using only your hands and perhaps the Pana for fine adjustments. It requires a good sense of spatial awareness and a steady hand. Sometimes, if the keystone is particularly large or heavy, the builder might have to partially stand on a small snow platform built against the inner wall, or get a momentary assist from someone outside if building as a pair. Once the keystone is roughly in position, it's gently manoeuvred and trimmed with the Pana from below until it settles perfectly into the opening. The fit needs to be snug. As it slides into its final resting place, you might hear a faint sigh or a subtle creak from the snow structure as the compressive forces redistribute and lock into equilibrium. It's a deeply satisfying moment, the culmination of all the previous effort. With that single block, the dome is sealed, and the igloo transforms from a rising wall into a complete integral shelter. It's the aha moment of snow construction. You know, like finally finding that one specific Lego piece that holds your entire overly ambitious spaceship together. The structural genius of this is that once the keystone is in place, the igloo can, in theory, support a considerable amount of weight. There are famous demonstrations, often shown in documentaries, of a person standing on top of a well-built igloo without it collapsing. This strength comes from the catenary shape and the way the compressive forces are transmitted down through the spiralling blocks, all locked together by that final, essential piece. The keystone essentially prevents the inward curve of the dome from collapsing upon itself. It's the linchpin. A quirky detail related to the keystone, or rather the hole it fills, is that before the final block was placed, this opening served a practical purpose during construction. It allowed smoke and stale air to escape if a small fire or lamp was used for warmth or visibility, by the builder working inside, especially if the construction took a long time. It also provided a way to pass blocks from an outside helper to the inside builder more easily in the later stages when the walls were high. After the keystone is securely in place, the builder might do some final chinking. This involves going around the inside and sometimes outside of the igloo and filling any small gaps or crevices between the blocks with soft snow. This is often done by hand, pressing loose snow into the joints to make the structure more airtight and improve its insulation. This chinking process, combined with the slight glazing that occurs on the inner surface as it warms and refreezes, which we'll discuss more, helps to make the igloo remarkably windproof. You could be inside an igloo during a raging blizzard, with winds screaming outside at hurricane force, and the interior would remain surprisingly calm and still. Historians still argue whether there were specific rituals or traditions associated with the placement of the keystone block. Given its importance, it's plausible that some Inuit groups might have had small personal customs or expressions of gratitude or completion, but these are not widely documented in a uniform way. What is clear is the immense practical and symbolic significance of this final block. It represents the successful completion of the shelter, the transformation of raw, cold snow into a haven of life. With the keystone locked in, the external structure of the igloo is complete. It stands as a perfect white dome against the Arctic landscape, a silent testament to human ingenuity. From the outside, it might look simple, almost stark, but you, having built it from the inside out, know the intricate spiral, the carefully angled blocks, the patient craftsmanship that has gone into its creation, and you know that this seemingly simple snow shell is now ready to be transformed, through a few more clever interior touches, into a surprisingly cosy home. The hard part of the exterior work is done, and the promise of warmth is very, very close. The keystone is in, the dome is sealed, and you're now standing within your newly minted snow house. From the outside, it's a picture of stark, minimalist beauty, but the interior, in its current state, is still just a hollow snow shell. To transform this into a truly livable, even comfortable space, the Igloo Qaggiq in its fullest sense, requires some clever interior engineering. This isn't about lavish furnishings or granite countertops. This is about maximizing warmth, managing airflow, and creating functional living zones, all within the constraints of snow and ice. The Inuit genius for practical design shines just as brightly inside the igloo as it does in its external structure. First, let's revisit that excavated floor. Remember how you were quarrying blocks from inside the igloo's footprint, lowering the central area. This wasn't just for convenience. This lowered section, typically near the entrance, forms the initial part of the cold trap. But the real living and sleeping areas are actually raised platforms, built up with snow on the sides and rear of the igloo, higher than the entrance floor. These platforms are crucial. Since warm air rises and cold air sinks, the raised platforms ensure that the inhabitants are sleeping and living in the warmest part of the igloo. The coldest air collects in the lower well near the door, effectively kept separate from the living space. It's simple physics, brilliantly applied. These sleeping platforms, or iglit, would be substantial, often occupying more than half of the igloo's interior floor space. They would be built up using blocks of snow, or by piling and packing snow to the desired height, typically a foot or two above the entrance level floor. The surface of these platforms would then be smoothed and covered with a thick, insulating layer of materials. This wasn't just for comfort, though, that was a factor. It was primarily for insulation from the cold snow beneath. First, a layer of willow twigs or heather, if available in the region, often collected in summer and saved, might be laid down to create an airy base. On top of this would go thick caribou hides, fur side up. Sometimes 2 layers of hides were used, the first layer skin side up, and the top layer fur side up, creating an exceptionally warm and surprisingly soft bed. These furs and skins were essential for preventing body heat from being lost to the cold snow platform directly underneath. Lying directly on snow, even inside an igloo, would quickly chill you to the bone. It's like the difference between sitting on a cold park bench and sitting on one with a thick cushion. The cushion doesn't generate heat, but it stops your heat from being sucked away. Ventilation is another critical aspect of interior igloo engineering. A completely sealed snow house with people and a lamp inside would quickly become stuffy and, more dangerously, accumulate carbon dioxide and potentially carbon monoxide from the lamp. To prevent this, a small ventilation hole, or Qaggiq, usually just a few inches in diameter, is poked through the igloo wall, typically near the top of the dome but not directly at the keystone, to avoid weakening it or causing drips. This allows stale air and lamp fumes to escape. Sometimes a second, smaller ventilation hole might be made lower down to allow fresh air to enter, creating a gentle circulation. The size and placement of these vents were carefully managed. Too large, and you lose too much precious heat. Too small, and the air quality suffers. It's a delicate balancing act, often adjusted based on the number of occupants and the strength of the lamp. Some old. Stories tell of builders so skilled they could tune the ventilation by the sound the air made passing through the hole. The entrance tunnel, or Qulliq, also plays a significant role in the interior climate control. As we touched upon earlier, it's designed to be lower than the main living platform, often with a U-shaped bend or a downward slope into the igloo, and then an upward step onto the living platform. This design acts as a very effective cold trap. The coldest, densest air pools in the lowest part of the tunnel and stays there, acting like a barrier against drafts and preventing the warmer air inside the igloo from spilling out every time someone enters or exits. The entrance itself on the outside might be covered with a block of snow or a piece of skin when not in use, especially during storms, further sealing the shelter. One historical account mentions that some igloo entrances were so well designed that a candle placed on the living platform would barely flicker, even with a strong wind blowing outside. Storage niches could also be carved into the thicker parts of the snow walls. These little snow cupboards were handy for keeping small tools, food items, or personal belongings out of the way but readily accessible. They also had the advantage of keeping stored food naturally refrigerated, or rather frozen. The layout inside a family igloo was often quite organised. The main sleeping platform at the rear was typically the largest. Side platforms might be used for children, or for storing gear and supplies. The area just inside the entrance, on the lower level, was the working area, where cooking might happen if a separate kitchen igloo wasn't built, where snow was brushed off clothing, and where messy tasks like butchering small game might be done. Historians still argue whether the specific internal layout of igloos, such as the exact height of sleeping platforms or the number of storage niches, was strictly dictated by tradition, or allowed for considerable adaptation based on family size, regional customs, and the length of anticipated occupancy. The evidence suggests a core set of principles was universally applied, but with room for local variation and personal preference. It's this combination of standardized design and flexible adaptation that made the igloo such a successful and enduring form of shelter. It wasn't just a snow dome, it was a carefully engineered microclimate, a cosy haven carved from the very heart of winter. And it's these thoughtful interior details that truly nursed hunters and their families through the darkest, coldest months. So, you've built your dome, sealed it with a keystone, and meticulously engineered the interior with raised platforms and a cold-trapping entrance. Now, let's delve into the fascinating physics of how this humble snow house actually achieves its surprisingly cosy internal temperatures, often a balmy 40 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, or even warmer right near the lamp, above the brutally frigid conditions outside. It seems like a magic trick, transforming the essence of cold into a warm embrace, but it's all down to sound scientific principles, understood intuitively and perfected by the Inuit over countless generations. The primary heat sources inside an igloo are quite simply human bodies and the Qulliq, the traditional Inuit soapstone lamp fueled by seal or whale blubber. An adult human at rest radiates about 100 watts of heat, equivalent to a bright incandescent light bulb. In a small, well-sealed space like an igloo, the collective body heat of several occupants can make a significant difference. But the real workhorse of heating is the Qulliq, this shallow crescent-shaped lamp, with a wick typically made of moss or Arctic cotton grass laid along one edge, burning rendered animal fat, could produce a surprising amount of heat as well as light. A larger Qulliq could elevate the interior temperature substantially. We'll dedicate a whole section to this vital lamp later, but for now understand it as the igloo's furnace. Now, how does that precious heat stay inside? This is where the snow walls perform their silent miracle. As we discussed earlier, snow, especially compacted snow, is an excellent insulator due to the vast amount of air trapped within its crystalline structure. A well-built igloo wall, typically 6 to 8 inches thick or more, has an R value, a measure of thermal resistance, comparable to or even exceeding some modern insulating materials. This thick blanket of snow drastically slows down the rate at which the heat generated inside can escape to the frigid exterior. Think of it like a thermos flask. The vacuum layer in a thermos prevents heat transfer, and the air pockets in the snow walls do something similar, albeit less perfectly. There's another fascinating process at play on the inner surface of the igloo walls. The heat from the occupants and the Qulliq warms the interior air. When this warm, moist air, moist from breath and any cooking, comes into contact with the cold snow walls, a tiny bit of the snow on the very surface melts. This isn't enough to cause dripping usually, because the melt water is immediately absorbed back into the porous snow, or crucially it refreezes, forming a thin, smooth layer of ice on the interior surface. This ice glaze serves two important purposes. Firstly, it seals any tiny remaining pores or cracks in the snow walls, making the igloo even more airtight and windproof. Secondly, this icy surface becomes somewhat reflective to radiant heat, helping to bounce some of the heat generated by the lamp and bodies back into the living space, rather than it being absorbed directly into the snow walls. It's like having a subtle, built-in heat reflector. This glazing process actually strengthens the igloo over time, as long as the interior temperature is managed correctly. If the igloo gets too warm inside, then you would indeed get significant melting and dripping, a sign that you need to reduce the lamp flame or increase ventilation. The dome shape itself also contributes to the even distribution of warmth. Convection currents are established. Warm air from the lamp and bodies rises, spreads across the curved ceiling, and then, as it cools slightly, descends along the walls, eventually sinking into the cold trap by the entrance. This gentle circulation helps to distribute the heat throughout the living area on the raised platforms, preventing hot spots directly above the lamp and cold spots elsewhere. It's a natural passive air conditioning system, in reverse. The temperature gradient across an igloo wall is quite remarkable. If it's minus 40 degrees Celsius or minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, outside the outer surface of the snow wall will be at, or very near, that ambient temperature. However, the inner surface of the wall might be just around freezing point, 0 degrees Celsius or 32 degrees Fahrenheit, due to that melt-refreeze glazing effect. And the air temperature in the living space, a foot or so away from the wall on the sleeping platform, could be a comfortable plus 5 degrees Celsius to plus 15 degrees Celsius, 41 degrees Fahrenheit to 59 degrees Fahrenheit, or even higher. This means that a relatively thin layer of snow is maintaining a temperature difference of up to 55 degrees Celsius, almost 100 degrees Fahrenheit. It's an incredible feat of natural insulation. One mainstream historical fact is that explorers like Vilhjalmur Stefansson, who lived with Inuit groups in the early 20th century, extensively documented the warmth and comfort of igloos, often noting that they were far superior to the tents and other shelters used by Western expeditions. Stefansson famously quipped that one could be snug as a bug in a rug inside a well-managed igloo. It's important to remember that the goal wasn't to make the igloo tropical. It was to raise the temperature to a level that was survivable and reasonably comfortable, especially when protected by warm fur clothing and bedding. The Inuit were not aiming for t-shirt weather. They were creating a refuge where the body's battle against the killing cold could be temporarily eased. A quirky tidbit often debated by Arctic enthusiasts is the precise sweet spot temperature inside an igloo. Some argue that keeping it just above freezing was optimal to minimise snowmelt and conserve lamp fuel, while others suggest slightly warmer was preferred for comfort, even if it required more careful management of the lamp and ventilation. The reality likely varied based on circumstances and personal preference. So, the physics of warmth in an igloo is a beautiful interplay of insulation, controlled melting and refreezing, strategic use of heat sources, and clever management of air circulation. It's a system that evolved through keen observation and an intimate understanding of how heat and cold behave in a snowy environment. No complex machinery, no fossil fuels, beyond the animal fat which was a renewable resource in their ecosystem, just elegant, effective science embodied in snow. And as you sit on your caribou skin platform, bathed in the soft light of the Qulliq, feeling the gentle warmth permeate your chilled bones, you realise this isn't just a snow house. It's a perfectly tuned thermal machine. The Qulliq is lit, its soft orange flame casting dancing shadows on the icy glazed walls of your snow sanctuary. The air within the igloo, once sharp with the bite of the Arctic, is now noticeably softer, carrying the faint, not unpleasant, oily scent of burning seal blubber and the subtle aroma of caribou furs. You've successfully navigated the complex physics of its construction and insulation, and now it's time to settle into the rhythm of daily life within this surprisingly cosy dome. What was it actually like to live, day in and day out, inside an Igloo Qaggiq? It was a life dictated by the seasons, the demands of the hunt, and the close-knit bonds of family and community. Your day would likely begin before the pale rumour of dawn, if dawn even makes an appearance during the deep winter months. You'd awaken on the raised sleeping platform, nestled under thick layers of caribou or polar bear skins. The fur, as we've noted, is incredibly insulating, and sharing the platform with other family members would add to the collective warmth. The first sensation might be the slight chill in the air compared to the cocoon of your bedding, a reminder of the world outside. Someone, often the woman of the household, would be responsible for tending the Qulliq, ensuring its flame hadn't gone out during the night or relighting it. This lamp was the heart of the home, providing not just warmth and light, but also the means to melt snow for drinking water and to do any minimal cooking that might occur indoors. Mornings would involve the quiet bustle of a household preparing for the day. Children might still be asleep, tucked warmly amongst the furs. The hunters would be checking their gear, harpoons, lines, perhaps their dog sled harnesses if they were using dogs. Clothing, which might have become slightly damp from perspiration or snow, would be carefully dried near the warmth of the Qulliq, but not so close as to scorch it. Getting dressed would be a deliberate process, layering furs and skins to provide maximum protection against the cold they would soon face. There's a specific technique to putting on traditional Inuit clothing to ensure no gaps are left for the cold to penetrate. It's not just throwing on a coat, it's encasing yourself in a personal microenvironment. Food would be simple but life-sustaining. Frozen meat, seal, walrus, caribou or fish might be thawed slightly near the lamp and eaten raw, or very lightly cooked. Eating raw, frozen meat provided essential vitamins, like vitamin C, that would be destroyed by cooking, helping to prevent deficiencies like scurvy. This practice was a critical adaptation for Arctic survival, something early European explorers often suffered from because they insisted on cooking all their food. A quirky, and perhaps slightly eyebrow-raising tidbit for our modern sensibilities is the Inuit practice of consuming pre-digested vegetation from the stomachs of hunted caribou. Caribou eat lichens and mosses, and their stomach contents provided a source of plant matter and vitamins otherwise scarce in the winter diet. It's a testament to their resourcefulness. Waste not, want not, even the stomach contents. Once the hunters departed, perhaps for a long day out on the sea ice, searching for seal breathing holes, or inland tracking caribou, life for those remaining in the igloo would continue. Women would engage in various tasks, preparing skins, sewing and mending clothing with fine bone needles and sinew thread, a skill essential for survival, as well-made clothing was the first line of defence against the cold, caring for young children, and perhaps carving small household items or decorative objects from bone or ivory. Storytelling was a vital part of daily life. Elders would recount ancient myths, legends, and hunting tales, passing down cultural knowledge, moral lessons, and practical survival skills to the younger generations. The igloo, with its intimate, enclosed space, was a perfect amphitheatre for these oral traditions. The soft glow of the Qulliq would illuminate the storyteller's face as they wove their narratives, captivating their audience. It's easy to imagine the scene, the wind howling faintly outside, the children wide-eyed, listening to tales of powerful spirits, brave hunters, and wily animals. Activities like games were also common. Inuit culture has a rich tradition of games, many of which were designed to develop strength, agility, coordination, and patience, all valuable skills for Arctic life. String games, or aurora-lit, were incredibly popular and intricate, with complex figures created from a loop of sinew. There were also tests of strength and balance. These weren't just idle pastimes, they were part of the educational fabric of the community. The interior of the igloo, while not spacious by modern standards, was efficiently organised. Tools and personal belongings had their designated spots, perhaps in wall niches or tucked away on the platforms. Maintaining a degree of cleanliness was important, not just for comfort but also for hygiene. Snow is a remarkably clean material, but living in close quarters requires care. Loose snow brushed off clothing would be swept towards the entrance, and waste would be disposed of outside, away from the dwelling. As the day wore on, if the hunters were successful, their return would be a significant event. The catch would be brought in, or butchered just outside, and shared according to established customs. The smell of fresh meat, and perhaps the sizzle of fat if some was rendered on the Qulliq for a special treat, would fill the igloo. The evening meal would be a communal affair, a time for sharing food and stories of the day's hunt. Historians still argue whether the social dynamics within a multifamily igloo were strictly hierarchical or more egalitarian, likely varying based on kinship ties and the personalities involved. As night approached, the Qulliq might be turned down to a lower flame to conserve fuel, and the family would settle back onto the sleeping platform, cocooned once more in their furs. The sounds would be those of quiet breathing, perhaps the soft murmur of a story continuing, and the ever-present subtle sounds of the igloo itself, the faint creak of settling snow, the whisper of air through the vent. Life in the dome was a microcosm of human existence. Work, family, nourishment, storytelling, all lived out in intimate connection with each other and in defiance of the formidable world just a few inches of snow away. It was a life of profound interdependence, resilience, and a deep, hard-won understanding of how to thrive in the heart of winter. The igloo, as we've seen, was far more than just a cosy family dwelling. For the Inuit hunter, it was an indispensable tool, a portable sanctuary that dramatically extended his range, endurance, and effectiveness in the relentless pursuit of game across the vast frozen landscapes. Without the ability to create temporary warm shelters quickly, winter hunting expeditions, especially those lasting several days or even weeks, would have been virtually impossible, or at least far more perilous. The igloo was the hunter's lifeline, his frozen fortress in the war against starvation and exposure. Imagine a group of hunters setting out from their main winter village or seasonal camp. They might be travelling by dog sled, or perhaps on foot pulling smaller hand sleds with essential gear. Their destination could be distant sealing grounds on the sea ice, known caribou migration routes or areas where muskoxen were known to congregate. These journeys could cover immense distances, far too great to return to the main camp each night. This is where the temporary hunting igloo, or Qaggiq, came into its own. These were typically smaller and more quickly constructed than family igloos, often just large enough for 2 or 3 men and their essential gear. A skilled hunter, working alone or with a partner, could erect such a shelter in an hour or two, using the techniques we've already discussed. The ability to build an igloo meant that hunters were not tethered to a permanent base. They could follow the game, responding to animal movements and changing ice conditions, with a flexibility that was crucial for success. If a promising area for seals was found, they could establish a small igloo camp nearby and hunt from there for several days. If the game moved on, they could abandon the igloos, which would eventually melt back into the landscape, leaving no trace, the ultimate sustainable housing, and build new ones further along their route. This nomadic capability was a huge advantage. It's like having a pop-up base camp that you can deploy anywhere, anytime, using only the materials at hand. Try doing that with a log cabin. Inside these hunting igloos, life was pared down to the essentials. The primary focus was on resting, regaining strength, repairing gear, and preparing for the next day's hunt. There might be a small Qulliq for warmth, and to melt snow for water, but fuel conservation would be even more critical than in a family igloo. Food would consist of provisions brought along, or, ideally, fresh meat from a successful hunt. The camaraderie of the hunt would fill the small space. Quiet conversations, shared anticipation, and the retelling of close calls or observations about animal behaviour. These shelters were intensely masculine spaces, focused on the singular purpose of acquiring food for their families and community. Consider the psychological advantage the igloo provided, knowing that, no matter how fierce the blizzard or how biting the cold, you could create a warm, secure refuge gave hunters the confidence to venture further and stay out longer. The Arctic winter is notorious for its sudden, violent storms, which can reduce visibility to zero and bring life-threatening wind chills. Being caught out in such conditions without shelter was often a death sentence. The igloo was the hunter's insurance policy against the unpredictable fury of the weather. He carried the knowledge of its construction in his mind and the tools, his Pana, on his sled or person. A historical fact, many Inuit oral traditions contain stories of hunters who survived seemingly impossible situations by quickly building an emergency snow shelter when a storm blew in unexpectedly. These tales reinforce the life-saving importance of this skill. The igloo also played a crucial role in specific hunting techniques. For example, when hunting seals at their breathing holes *Igloo* in the sea ice, hunters would often build a semicircular snow wall, or even a small open-topped igloo as a windbreak. This provided some protection from the biting wind during the long, patient vigil required, sometimes lasting many hours waiting for a seal to surface. The white snow structure also helped to camouflage the hunter against the snowy backdrop. Some hunters would even lie on a piece of caribou fur on the snow inside this windbreak to insulate themselves from the cold ice, peering intently at the igloo, harpoon at the ready. The igloo, or its components, became an integrated part of the hunting strategy itself. Furthermore, a temporary igloo near a kill site, especially for a large animal like a walrus or a polar bear, allowed hunters to butcher the animal in relative shelter, and to guard the meat from scavengers like Arctic foxes or wolves, until it could be transported back to the main camp. This was particularly important in the depths of winter when darkness and extreme cold made extended outdoor work hazardous. A quirky, though perhaps grim, aspect of igloo use in hunting relates to polar bear hunting. Sometimes hunters would intentionally create a slightly imperfect igloo with a deliberately weak section, or a specific type of entrance if they knew a polar bear was in the vicinity and they were trying to bait it or confront it in a semi-controlled encounter. This was exceptionally dangerous and would only be undertaken by the most experienced and courageous hunters. Historians still argue about the prevalence and specifics of such highly specialised and risky hunting techniques involving igloos, as accounts are often fragmented or legendary. The hunter's snow house wasn't just a passive shelter, it was an active enabler of his craft. It allowed him to match the endurance of his prey, to penetrate deep into the frozen wilderness, and to wait patiently for the opportune moment. It transformed the hunter from a fleeting visitor in a hostile land into someone who could, for a time, make a home wherever the hunt took him. The igloo extended the very sinews of the hunter, making him a more formidable and successful provider. Without this remarkable snowcraft, the Inuit way of life, so dependent on successful winter hunting, would have been unimaginably different and far more precarious. The dome of snow was in essence the hunter's ever-ready, life-sustaining partner. The hunter's igloo was a masterpiece of mobile shelter, but its effectiveness was hugely amplified by another critical skill, choosing precisely where to build it. Siting the igloo wasn't just about finding a good snowdrift, it was a strategic decision deeply intertwined with the hunt itself, a calculation of proximity to game, prevailing weather conditions, escape routes, and the subtle cues of the land and ice. A well-placed igloo could mean the difference between a successful hunt and a fruitless, dangerous expedition. It was about putting yourself in the right place at the right time, with a secure base of operations. Proximity to game was, of course, a primary consideration. If hunters were tracking a herd of caribou, they would aim to build their temporary igloos close enough to the herd's anticipated movements to intercept them, but not so close as to spook the animals. This required an intimate knowledge of caribou behaviour, their feeding patterns, and their reactions to wind and weather. They'd look for signs, fresh tracks, droppings, areas where caribou had been scraping away snow to find lichen. Similarly, for seal hunting, igloos would be sited on the sea ice, in areas known to have a high concentration of breathing holes, Igloo. This wasn't random. Experienced hunters knew that seals favoured certain types of ice conditions, currents, and depths. They could read the surface of the ice, the presence of pressure ridges, the age and thickness of the ice, to identify promising locations. It's like a fisherman knowing the best, spots on a lake where the fish are likely to be biting. The Inuit hunter had a similar map etched in his mind for the vast expanses of snow and ice. However, just being close to game wasn't enough. The immediate vicinity of the igloo needed to offer good building snow, that essential anniu. So, there was often a trade-off. The absolute best hunting spot might have poor snow, requiring them to site the igloo a little further away, in a location that offered both reasonable proximity to the hunting grounds and suitable construction materials. This required careful reconnaissance and judgment, Sometimes, if a prime hunting location lacked good snow, hunters might even resort to cutting blocks from a suitable drift some distance away, and hauling them on a small sled to the desired igloo site, a more laborious process reserved for particularly promising situations. Weather considerations were paramount. The prevailing wind direction was a major factor in choosing an igloo site and orienting its entrance. You'd want to build in a spot that offered some natural protection, if possible, perhaps in the lee of a small hill, a large rock outcropping, if in a coastal or inland area, or a substantial stable snowdrift. This could reduce wind pressure on the igloo and minimise snow accumulation around the entrance. The entrance tunnel, as we know, was generally faced away from the prevailing wind. Understanding local wind patterns and how they might shift was crucial. A sudden wind shift could bury an improperly oriented entrance in drifting snow, a potentially dangerous situation. One interesting, somewhat fringe belief held by some hunters was that certain landforms or ice features could channel animal spirits, and sighting an igloo near such a feature might bring good luck in the hunt. A blend of practical observation and spiritual geography. The stability of the chosen site was also critical, especially when building on sea ice. You wouldn't want to build your igloo on ice that was too thin, or in an area prone to breaking up or forming leads, open channels of water. Experienced hunters were adept at reading the ice, judging its thickness by its colour and texture, and by sounding it with their harpoon or a special ice chisel. They listened for the telltale groans and cracks that signalled unsafe conditions. Building too close to an active pressure ridge could also be hazardous, as these ridges are formed by immense forces and can shift or collapse. A mainstream historical fact is that entire Inuit hunting parties were sometimes lost when the sea ice they were camped upon unexpectedly broke up due to storms or changing currents, highlighting the ever-present dangers and the importance of careful site selection. Access to fresh water, even in frozen form, was another consideration, though less critical than game or good snow, as snow could always be melted. However, if a source of clear freshwater ice, from a frozen lake or river, or even an old desalinated sea ice flow, was nearby, it was preferred for drinking water as it required less fuel to melt than snow and often tasted better. Visibility for hunting and for spotting approaching dangers, like polar bears or a sudden storm, also played a role. While an igloo provided shelter, hunters still needed to be aware of their surroundings. Sometimes a slightly elevated position, offering a good vantage point, might be chosen, provided it wasn't too exposed to the wind. The concept of escape routes might also subtly influence site selection, especially in areas known for dangerous game or volatile ice. Hunters would subconsciously note features of the terrain or ice that might offer a path of retreat or a place of temporary refuge if things went wrong. This wasn't necessarily a conscious checklist item, but rather part of the overall environmental awareness that characterized a skilled Arctic traveller. Historians still argue about the degree to which spiritual or cosmological considerations influenced igloo siting for hunting. While practical factors were undoubtedly primary, it's plausible that certain locations might have been favoured or avoided based on traditional beliefs, stories associated with the area, or the perceived presence of particular spirits. The Inuit worldview did not sharply separate the practical from the spiritual. They were often interwoven. Ultimately, siting an igloo for sustenance was a complex decision-making process, a blend of empirical knowledge, accumulated experience, and an almost intuitive feel for the environment. It was about seeing the invisible connections between snow conditions, animal behaviour, weather patterns, and the very structure of the land and ice. A well-chosen site meant a safer, more comfortable and more productive hunt, directly contributing to the survival and well-being of the hunter and his community. It was another layer of ingenuity, ensuring that the hunter's frozen sanctuary was not just well-built, but also well-placed. We've mentioned it several times, like a recurring warm heartbeat in our snowy narrative, and now it's time to give the Qulliq its proper due. This unassuming shallow lamp, traditionally carved from soapstone, steatite, and fueled by the rendered blubber of seals or whales, was far more than just a source of light in the long Arctic night. It was the indispensable heart of the igloo, the central heating system, the stove, the clothes dryer, and a potent symbol of home, family, and life itself. Without the Qulliq, the igloo, for all its structural genius, would have remained a cold, dark shell, uninhabitable for any extended period. Imagine the scene inside the igloo. Outside, a blizzard might be raging, the wind a screaming banshee, temperatures plummeting to unimaginable lows. But inside, thanks to the Qulliq, a small steady flame dances, casting a warm orange glow across the curved snow walls. This flame, often no bigger than a candle's but sometimes broader and more robust depending on the lamp's size and the number of wicks, is the focal point of the interior. It provides a surprising amount of light, enough for people to see each other, to work on crafts, to share stories, and to carry out the daily tasks of life. In the perpetual or near-perpetual darkness of midwinter, this light was a psychological balm as much as a practical necessity. It pushed back the oppressive gloom, creating a small illuminated haven. You know, like that one street lamp that actually works on your block, making you feel just a bit safer on a dark night. But its role as a heater was even more critical. The slow, steady combustion of animal fat generated a significant amount of radiant heat. A well-tended Qulliq could raise the temperature inside an igloo by many degrees, as we discussed, making the difference between shivering uncontrollably and being able to relax in relative comfort, even shedding outer layers of fur clothing. The heat from the Qulliq was also essential for managing the igloo's internal microclimate, contributing to that thin ice glaze on the inner walls which improved insulation and wind resistance. Positioned centrally on the main living platform, or sometimes on its own small snow pedestal, its warmth radiated outwards, creating that pocket of livable warmth. The Qulliq also served as the igloo's stove. While much of the traditional Inuit diet, especially in winter, consisted of raw or frozen meat, the lamp provided the means for melting snow and ice for drinking water, an absolutely vital function, as dehydration is a serious threat in the cold, dry Arctic air. A small pot, also often carved from soapstone or sometimes made from clay in earlier periods, could be suspended over the flame to slowly melt chunks of snow or ice. Occasionally, small pieces of meat or fish might be warmed or lightly cooked over the lamp, though extensive boiling or frying was uncommon due to the limited heat output and the need to conserve precious fuel. It wasn't exactly a gourmet kitchen setup, but it provided the essentials. Fuel for the Qulliq was primarily blubber from marine mammals. Seal blubber was the most common, being readily available through much of the year. Whale blubber, when a whale was successfully hunted or a carcass washed ashore, was also highly prized as it burned for a long time and gave off good heat. The blubber would be rendered, slowly melted down to extract the oil, or sometimes small pieces of fresh blubber were simply placed near the flame to melt and feed the wick. The wick itself was typically made from Arctic cotton grass, suputi, or dried moss, carefully arranged along the straight edge of the crescent-shaped lamp. Tending the Qulliq was a skilled art, usually the responsibility of the woman of the household. She would meticulously trim the wick with a small, often bone or ivory pick-like tool, takuti, to ensure a clean, smoke-free flame and to conserve fuel. A poorly trimmed wick would sputter, produce soot and waste oil. A perfectly tended Qulliq burned with a clear, steady flame and very little smoke. This skill was highly valued. A historical fact often cited is that a young woman's proficiency in managing a Qulliq was considered an important attribute for marriage. The soapstone, steatite, used to make the lamps was a valuable resource. It's a relatively soft stone, easy to carve with simple tools, yet it's also resistant to heat and cracking. Good soapstone deposits were not found everywhere, so lamps themselves could be important trade items or heirlooms passed down through generations. Some lamps were small and portable, suitable for a hunting igloo, while others were much larger, up to 2 or 3 feet long, serving as the main lamp in a larger family igloo. These larger lamps might have multiple wicks and could provide significant warmth and light. A quirky tidbit is that the soot collected from the underside of a pot suspended over a Qulliq, or even from the lamp itself, was sometimes used by women for tattooing, mixed with a little oil to make a pigment. The Qulliq was more than just a utilitarian object. It was imbued with deep cultural and spiritual significance. It was often associated with the feminine spirit, with nourishment, and with the warmth of home and family. There were rituals and beliefs connected to its use. For example, it was considered important to keep the flame alive, as letting it go out might be seen as bad luck, or disrespectful to the spirits. When moving to a new igloo, the flame from the old Qulliq might be carefully transported to light the new one, ensuring continuity. Historians and anthropologists still explore the nuances of the lamp's symbolic meanings across different Inuit regions, as it often features prominently in myths and traditional stories as a life-giving force. The soft, flickering light, the gentle warmth, the faint scent of burning oil. These were the sensory hallmarks of the igloo interior, all emanating from this simple stone lamp. It was the sun and the hearth combined, a small contained fire that held the immense cold of the Arctic at bay. It was the engine that powered the warmth of the snow house, transforming it from a mere shelter into a true home, a place where life, culture and community could flourish even in the harshest of winters. Its importance cannot be overstated. The Qulliq was quite literally the flame of Inuit life in the snows. While the igloo stands as a testament to ingenious survival, a cosy haven against the Arctic's fury, it wasn't entirely without its own subtle dangers. Life inside the snow house, though remarkably secure compared to the world outside its walls, still carried certain risks, some insidious and unseen, others more sudden and dramatic. Understanding these potential perils was just as much a part of Arctic knowledge as knowing how to build the igloo itself. After all, even the cosiest fort can have a weak spot, and a lapse in vigilance could turn sanctuary into trap. Perhaps the most insidious danger was the build-up of harmful gases, primarily carbon monoxide, CO, and carbon dioxide, CO2. The trusty Qulliq, while the source of life-giving warmth and light, was also, through its combustion of animal fats, a producer of these gases. In a well-ventilated igloo with a properly managed Qaggiq ventilation hole, these gases would typically dissipate harmlessly. However, if the vent became blocked by drifting snow, or if it was made too small in an attempt to conserve maximum heat, or if the Qulliq was burning inefficiently with a smoky flame, these gases could accumulate to dangerous levels. Carbon monoxide is particularly treacherous because it's odourless and colourless. Early symptoms of CO poisoning, headache, dizziness, nausea, might be mistaken for general fatigue or illness. Prolonged exposure could lead to unconsciousness and, ultimately, death. It's a silent killer, and one that early Arctic explorers, less accustomed to managing such enclosed lamp-heated spaces, sometimes fell victim to in their own tents if they weren't careful with stoves. The Inuit were keenly aware of this risk, even if they didn't understand the precise chemistry. They knew that bad air could make people sick or sleepy, and that fresh air was essential. The careful tending of the Qulliq to ensure a clean burn and the meticulous maintenance of the ventilation hole were not just matters of comfort but of survival. If the flame of the Qulliq started to burn strangely, or if people began to feel unwell, they would immediately check and clear the vent. This practical knowledge was crucial. A quirky, though unverified anecdote sometimes shared, is that a small caged bird, like a snow bunting if one could be kept, might have occasionally been used as an early warning system, similar to canaries in coal mines. If the bird showed distress, it was a sign the air was becoming foul, while charming widespread evidence for this specific practice in igloos is thin. Another risk, though less common in a well-built igloo, was structural instability or collapse, particularly during sudden thaws or if the igloo was poorly constructed with inferior snow. If temperatures unexpectedly rose close to the melting point, or if strong sunlight during spring began to weaken the snow structure, the dome could sag or even collapse. This was more of a risk for igloos built late in the winter season as spring approached, or those built hastily with less than ideal snow. A sudden collapse, especially if people were sleeping inside, could be dangerous, though usually the slow sagging or increased dripping would give some warning. The main danger here might be less from the impact of snow blocks, which are relatively light, and more from exposure if your shelter suddenly disappears in the middle of a cold night. You'd be in a real pickle, wouldn't you? Suddenly finding yourself in an open-air bedroom at -20. Dripping water could also be a significant nuisance and a subtle danger. If the igloo became too warm inside, perhaps from too large a Qulliq flame or too many occupants generating body heat, the inner surface would melt more than it could refreeze. This would lead to constant dripping, making clothing and bedding damp. Dampness is a serious enemy in the Arctic, as wet clothing loses its insulating properties rapidly, and can lead to hypothermia even in temperatures above freezing. Managing the internal temperature to keep it just above freezing, but not warm enough to cause excessive melting, was a constant balancing act. The Inuit became masters of this thermal tuning. Fire, while seemingly paradoxical in a house made of snow, was a minor but present risk. The Qulliq flame itself was generally very controlled. However, flammable materials like dry moss used for wicks, or perhaps a piece of fur clothing placed too close to the lamp to dry, could potentially ignite. While a widespread conflagration was unlikely in a snow house, the walls wouldn't burn obviously, A small localized fire could produce a lot of smoke and potentially ignite bedding or clothing, causing burns or creating a panic in the confined space. Historians still argue about the frequency of such minor fire incidents within igloos, but given the Inuits' careful management of the Qulliq, major fires were likely rare. Food storage within the igloo, while convenient, could attract unwelcome visitors if not managed properly. While a polar bear isn't going to casually stroll into your entrance tunnel, one hopes. Smaller scavengers like Arctic foxes or even wolverines could be drawn by the scent of meat. Ensuring the entrance was securely blocked, especially at night or when the igloo was unoccupied, was important. Most meat was stored frozen outside the igloo, often cached under snow and rocks for this very reason. Finally, there was the psychological aspect. While the igloo was a haven, spending extremely long periods, weeks or even months, in a relatively small, confined space with the same few people during the continuous darkness of polar winter could be challenging. This is true for any isolated group. Inuit culture had ways of mitigating this, through storytelling, games, social visits, between nearby igloos, if part of a larger camp, and a strong emphasis on cooperation and patience. However, the potential for cabin fever or interpersonal friction was always there, a subtle stressor in an already demanding environment. Despite these potential dangers, the igloo remained an astonishingly safe and effective shelter. The risks were generally well understood and managed through careful practice and accumulated wisdom. The igloo wasn't a foolproof bubble, but it was a masterful adaptation that tilted the odds of survival heavily in favour of its inhabitants. It was a matter of respecting the environment, respecting the structure, and respecting the subtle signs that warned when something was amiss. While we often picture the igloo as a solitary dome, a lone sentinel against the vast Arctic whiteness, this wasn't always the case. Sometimes, particularly during the darkest, coldest parts of winter, when communities tended to be more stationary, or at traditional gathering sites, these individual snow houses would coalesce into something more complex, snow village networks. These weren't sprawling cities of snow, but rather clusters of interconnected or closely situated igloos that transformed individual family shelters into a communal living space, a subterranean warren of warmth and sociality beneath the snow-swept plains. The simplest form of this was a small cluster of independent igloos built in close proximity, perhaps for several related families or a hunting group. This allowed for easy social interaction, sharing of resources, and mutual support. Children could play together, moving between dwellings, and adults could visit, share news, or collaborate on tasks. But the Inuit took this concept further, sometimes creating actual interconnected structures. Several igloos might be built so that their entrance tunnels opened into a common, larger connecting tunnel, or even a central communal igloo, a Qaggiq or ceremonial snow house. This created an entire complex that could be navigated without having to go outside into the biting wind and cold. Imagine a small, self-contained snowy neighbourhood, all under one or several interconnected roofs. These Qaggiq or festival houses were the largest and most impressive examples of Inuit snow architecture. They were specifically built for community gatherings, feasts, dances, spiritual ceremonies and games. A Qaggiq might be constructed as a single, exceptionally large dome, requiring the coordinated effort of many builders, or by ingeniously linking several standard-sized family igloos together with covered passageways, creating a multi-chambered communal space. The construction of such a large snow structure was a significant undertaking, a testament to communal cooperation and sophisticated building skills. Inside a Qaggiq, the atmosphere would be alive with drumming, singing, dancing, like the energetic drum dances, and storytelling. These gatherings were vital for reinforcing social bonds, resolving disputes, celebrating successful hunts, and conducting important rituals. It was the community's living room, town hall, and spiritual centre, all rolled into one snowy package. It makes your local community centre's bingo night seem a bit tame in comparison, doesn't it? The passageways connecting these igloos were not just simple tunnels. They were often carefully constructed, sometimes with their own smaller domed sections or alcoves for storage or for specific activities. These tunnels would also incorporate the cold trap principle, ensuring that the warmth of the individual living igloos was not lost to the connecting passages. Moving through such a network would have been a unique experience. From the intimate warmth of your family igloo, through a cooler, dimly lit tunnel, perhaps past the entrance to another family's dwelling, and into the larger, more animated space of a communal dome. These snow village networks offered several advantages. Socially, they fostered a strong sense of community and allowed for the easy sharing of information and resources. In an environment where cooperation was key to survival, this interconnectedness was invaluable. Practically, they offered enhanced protection from the elements. Once inside the network, you could move between different homes or to the communal area without braving the weather. This was especially beneficial for children and the elderly. There are even accounts suggesting that in some very extensive igloo complexes, separate smaller igloos might be built specifically for the hunting dogs, connected to the main network, keeping the valuable animals sheltered as well. A quirky detail sometimes mentioned in older ethnographic accounts is that children would sometimes create their own miniature interconnected play igloos on the periphery of the main village, mimicking the adult structures. Building and maintaining such a complex required a high degree of social organisation and cooperation. Decisions about where to build, how to connect the structures, and how to share the tasks of construction and maintenance would have been made collectively, likely guided by experienced elders or hunt leaders. The lifespan of these snow villages was, by nature, temporary, tied to the winter season and the availability of game in the area. As spring approached and the snow began to melt, or if the hunting grounds became depleted, the village would be abandoned, its structures slowly returning to the earth, leaving little or no permanent trace. This ephemeral nature is one of the challenges for archaeologists studying these sites. The evidence is often subtle. Historians still debate the typical size and complexity of these snow village networks, while some early accounts from explorers and ethnographers describe quite extensive interconnected systems. Others suggest that smaller clusters of 2 to 5 family igloos were more common, with the very large Qaggiq-centred complexes reserved for specific ceremonial periods or particularly populous winter camps. The archaeological record can sometimes provide clues, such as clusters of collapsed igloo depressions or concentrations of artifacts, but reconstructing the exact layout of these snowy communities from centuries past is a meticulous and challenging task. These snow villages represent a sophisticated adaptation to the demands of Arctic social life and environmental extremes. They demonstrate how the basic igloo unit could be scaled up and networked to create not just individual shelters, but thriving interconnected communities, all ingeniously crafted from the winter's most abundant resource. It was a way of creating an inside world that was warm, social and secure, even when the outside world was at its most formidable and unforgiving. This ability to build not just a house, but a whole hidden village under the snow, truly underscores the depth of Inuit architectural and social ingenuity. The igloo, for the Inuit, was never just a pile of snow blocks artfully arranged to keep out the cold. It was a space imbued with meaning, a canvas for their cosmology, a stage for their stories, and a silent participant in their spiritual lives. While its practical function as a shelter was paramount, the Igloo-viaggaq resonated with deeper cultural and symbolic significance, woven into the rich tapestry of Inuit folklore, beliefs, and traditions. To truly understand the snow house, you have to look beyond its physical form and appreciate its place in the Inuit worldview. The very act of building an igloo could be seen as a microcosm of creation, a bringing of order and life out of the chaotic, frozen expanse of winter. The builder, through skill and knowledge passed down through generations, transformed the raw material of the Arctic into a sacred space, a temporary home that was nonetheless a centre of the human universe for its inhabitants. The circular shape of the igloo, echoing the horizon, the sun, the moon, and the cycle of the seasons, held a natural symbolism. The dome, arching overhead like the sky, created a self-contained world within the larger world. Some scholars suggest that the igloo, with its central Qulliq and raised sleeping platform, symbolically represented a womb, a place of warmth, nourishment, and security, from which the hunters would emerge to engage with the powerful forces of nature and to which they would return for renewal. Storytelling, as we've touched upon, was a vital activity within the igloo, especially during the long, dark winter nights. The flickering light of the Qulliq would illuminate faces as ancient myths and legends were recounted. Tales of powerful spirits like Sedna, the mistress of the sea animals, whose cooperation was essential for a successful hunt. Stories of the moon spirit, Qaggiq, often a benevolent male figure associated with hunters and game, and tales of the sun spirit, Qulliq, usually female, whose return in spring was eagerly awaited. These stories weren't just entertainment. They encoded the moral framework of Inuit society, explained the workings of the universe, provided guidance on proper conduct towards animals and spirits, and preserved historical memory. The igloo was the theatre for this oral tradition, its snow walls absorbing and echoing the narratives that shaped Inuit identity. It's like how your childhood bedroom walls probably absorbed countless whispered secrets and bedtime stories, becoming part of your personal history. Shamans, or Qaggiq, singular Qaggiq, played a crucial role in Inuit spiritual life, and the igloo often served as the setting for their rituals and healing practices. An Qaggiq might enter a trance state within the igloo, undertaking a spirit journey to consult with helping spirits, to divine the location of game, to appease angered deities, or to heal the sick. These ceremonies could be intense and dramatic, sometimes involving chanting, drumming, and feats that appeared magical to onlookers. The confined, intimate space of the igloo would amplify the power and mystery of these shamanic performances. One mainstream historical fact is that these shamanic practices were once widespread across Inuit societies, though they declined significantly with the arrival of European missionaries and the introduction of Christianity. There were also everyday beliefs and customs associated with the igloo, for instance the placement of certain objects or the observance of particular behaviours upon entering or leaving might be dictated by tradition to ensure good luck or to avoid offending spirits. The threshold of the igloo, the point of transition between the human-created inner world and the powerful natural world outside, could be seen as a spiritually significant boundary. Some accounts mention that hunters might perform small rituals before leaving the igloo for a hunt, or upon returning, to show respect to the animal spirits and to ensure future success. Even the snow itself, the material of the igloo, was sometimes viewed with a degree of reverence. It was the substance that made life possible in winter, providing not just shelter, but also a surface for travel and a medium that preserved the tracks of game. A quirky tidbit found in some older ethnographic texts suggests that in certain regions there were specific songs or incantations that a builder might quietly utter while cutting snow blocks, intended to ensure the igloo would be strong and warm, or to ask the snow spirit for its cooperation. Whether these were widespread practices or more localized traditions is something scholars continue to investigate. Historians still argue about the extent to which specific architectural features of the igloo, like the direction of the building spiral or the exact placement of the ventilation hole, were dictated by purely functional needs versus symbolic or cosmological considerations. It's likely a complex interplay of both. The Inuit worldview did not create a rigid separation between the practical and the sacred. Often, what was practical was also imbued with spiritual meaning, and vice versa. The igloo, in its elegant efficiency and its perfect adaptation to the environment, could itself be seen as an expression of Rusila, a complex Inuktitut concept that encompasses weather, consciousness, intelligence, and the natural order of the universe. A well-built igloo was in harmony with Scylla. The igloo was more than a temporary shelter. It was a cultural vessel. It cradled families, nurtured communities, and provided the stage upon which the rich spiritual and oral traditions of the Inuit were enacted. Within its snowy embrace, life was sustained, knowledge was passed down, and the human spirit found a way to flourish in one of Earth's most challenging environments. The stories whispered within its walls, the ceremonies performed under its dome, and the very act of its creation all contributed to a profound sense of place and belonging for the people of the snow. The igloo, a symbol of Arctic resilience and ingenuity for millennia, faced an unprecedented wave of change throughout the 20th century. The increasing contact with European and North American societies, traders, whalers, missionaries, government administrators, brought with it new technologies, materials, economic systems, and cultural influences that began to slowly but surely impact the traditional way of life, and with it, the central role of the snow house. This wasn't an overnight collapse, but rather a gradual thaw of tradition, a complex period of adaptation and loss. One of the most significant early impacts came from the introduction of firearms. Rifles made hunting more efficient in some ways, allowing hunters to take game from a greater distance, and with less reliance on the patient. Close-quarters techniques often associated with igloo-based hunting camps, like waiting at a seal's breathing hole. While this might seem like a straightforward advantage, It also began to alter the patterns of hunting and the types of shelters needed. A hunting party equipped with rifles might cover territory differently, or require less extended stays in one specific location, subtly reducing the necessity for temporary igloos in some contexts. The establishment of permanent trading posts by entities like the Hudson's Bay Company also played a crucial role. These posts offered access to imported goods, metal tools, canvas for tents, wooden planks, kerosene lamps, processed foods, and textiles. While Inuit had always been adaptable and eager to incorporate useful new materials, these goods began to offer alternatives to traditional materials and technologies. Kerosene lamps and portable stoves, for example, could provide light and heat without the need for skill in managing a Qulliq or the constant supply of animal blubber. Canvas tents, though less insulative than a well-built igloo, were lighter to transport. When wood for poles was available or also transported, and quicker to erect in certain conditions, especially during summer months or for more mobile groups. It's not that igloos were immediately abandoned, rather, their seasonal or situational use began to shift. Think of it like how owning a car doesn't mean you never walk, but it certainly changes when and where you choose to. The movement towards more settled communities, often encouraged by governments and missions for reasons of administration, healthcare and education, was perhaps the most profound driver of change. As Inuit families began to live in permanent settlements, often in wooden houses provided by the government or built with new materials, the necessity of the igloo as a primary winter dwelling naturally declined. These wooden houses, while offering a different kind of permanence, were not always well suited to the Arctic environment or the Inuit way of life, sometimes leading to new problems like overcrowding or difficulties with heating and ventilation. However, they represented a significant shift away from the nomadic or semi-nomadic lifestyle in which the igloo had been so central. If your main home is a wooden house in a village, the igloo becomes more of a specialised temporary shelter for hunting trips, rather than your everyday winter residence. Education systems based on Western models also played a part. As children began attending residential schools, often far from their families and traditional learning environments, the intergenerational transmission of knowledge, including complex skills like igloo building, Qulliq management and traditional hunting techniques, was disrupted. If a young man spent his formative years in a schoolroom rather than out on the land with his elders, he might not acquire the deep intuitive understanding required to build a life-saving snow house under pressure. This was a significant and often tragic cultural loss. The economic changes were also impactful. The shift towards a wage-based economy in some areas, or an increased reliance on trapping for the fur trade to acquire cash for store-bought goods, altered traditional subsistence patterns. While hunting remained vital, the emphasis and methods could change, influencing the types of shelter used. A quirky, yet telling detail is how some Inuit quickly adapted new materials for old purposes. For instance, a piece of corrugated cardboard might be used as an extra layer of insulation on a sleeping platform, or a metal pot might replace a soapstone one over a modern stove. It's important to avoid a simplistic narrative of modernity destroying tradition. Inuit have always been incredibly adaptive and innovative. They selectively adopted and ingeniously modified new tools and materials to suit their needs. For a time, some families might live in a wooden house in a settlement, but still use an igloo when out on extended hunting or trapping expeditions. The igloo didn't vanish overnight. Its role evolved. It became less of a primary dwelling and more of a specialised skill, a temporary field shelter. Even today, the ability to build an igloo is still valued, especially among hunters and those who travel on the land, as a crucial survival skill. If your snowmobile breaks down miles from anywhere, or a sudden blizzard hits, knowing how to throw up a quick snow shelter can still save your life. Historians and anthropologists still debate the pace and regional variations of this transition. In some more isolated areas, traditional igloo use persisted for longer. In others, closer to trading posts and administrative centres, the shift happened more rapidly. There's no single story that fits all Inuit communities across the vast Arctic. What is clear is that the 20th century brought a wave of external pressures and opportunities that fundamentally reshaped the context in which the igloo existed. The snow house, once the ubiquitous symbol of winter life, began to recede from the everyday, becoming more a part of cultural memory and a specialised skill, though its underlying principles of ingenuity and adaptation remained deeply embedded in the Inuit spirit. The thaw was not just of snow and ice, but of a way of life that had endured for millennia. Though the widespread everyday use of the igloo as a primary dwelling has largely faded into the annals of history, the profound wisdom embedded in its design and construction continues to resonate. The echoes of this ancient Arctic architecture can still be heard, offering valuable lessons for contemporary shelter design, sustainable living, and our broader relationship with challenging environments. The igloo isn't just a historical curiosity, it's a masterclass in resourcefulness, efficiency, and harmony with nature, and its legacy is surprisingly relevant even in our high-tech world. One of the most enduring lessons from the igloo is the principle of using local, readily available materials. The Inuit didn't import vast quantities of timber or manufactured components. They used what the Arctic environment provided in abundance: snow. This approach minimizes transportation costs, reduces embodied energy, the energy consumed in producing and transporting materials, and ensures that the structure is inherently suited to its climatic context. In an age where we are increasingly concerned about the carbon footprint of construction and the depletion of resources, the igloo's philosophy of building with what's there offers a powerful counter-narrative. Imagine if modern architecture more consistently prioritized locally sourced, low-impact materials. It's a bit like choosing to cook with seasonal local produce instead of flying in exotic ingredients from halfway across the world. Better for the planet, and often surprisingly effective. The igloo's energy efficiency is another remarkable aspect of its legacy. Its dome shape minimizes surface area relative to its volume, reducing heat loss. The superb insulating properties of snow, coupled with the clever cold trap entrance and controlled ventilation, created a thermally efficient shelter, heated primarily by body heat and a small, sustainable fuel source: animal fat. This contrasts sharply with many modern buildings that rely heavily on fossil fuels and complex HVAC systems to maintain comfortable temperatures. The igloo reminds us that thoughtful design, working with natural principles rather than against them, can achieve remarkable thermal performance. There's a growing field of biomimetic architecture that looks to natural forms and processes for inspiration. The igloo was practicing this millennia ago. The structural elegance of the catenary-dome, built without internal supports using a spiraling block technique, is a testament to sophisticated intuitive engineering. This method of creating strong self-supporting structures from simple, identical, or near-identical units has parallels in modern modular construction and geodesic dome designs. Buckminster Fuller, the famed architect and inventor who popularized geodesic domes in the mid-20th century, was undoubtedly aware of the igloo's structural principles. The igloo demonstrates how complex, stable forms can arise from simple rules and local materials, a lesson that continues to inspire architects and engineers looking for efficient and resilient building solutions. The adaptability and temporary nature of the igloo also hold important lessons. It was a shelter perfectly suited to a semi-nomadic lifestyle, built when and where it was needed, and then, at the end of its use, it simply melted back into the environment, leaving no lasting scar on the landscape. This concept of ephemeral or biodegradable architecture is gaining traction in discussions about sustainable development and disaster relief. Imagine temporary shelters for displaced populations that are not only effective but also environmentally benign, designed to return to the earth once their purpose is served. A quirky modern parallel might be found in temporary art installations or festival structures designed for minimal environmental impact, though the stakes are obviously much lower than Arctic survival. Furthermore, the way the igloo fostered community and social cohesion, especially in the networked snow villages, offers insights into how an built environment can support social well-being. The interconnected spaces, the shared communal areas like the Qaggiq, all facilitated interaction, cooperation, and the reinforcement of cultural bonds. In an increasingly individualized and sometimes isolating modern world, the igloo reminds us of the importance of designing spaces that bring people together. The deep embodied knowledge required to build an igloo, the ability to read the snow, to understand its properties, to wield the Pana with precision, also highlights the value of traditional ecological knowledge, tech. This is the accumulated wisdom of indigenous peoples about their environments, passed down through generations. For a long time, tech was often dismissed by Western science, but there's a growing recognition of its profound insights and its importance for sustainable resource management and climate change adaptation. The Igloo is a physical manifestation of incredibly sophisticated tech. Historians and ethnographers still work to document and understand the full depth of this knowledge before it fades further, recognizing its intrinsic value. One mainstream historical fact is that many early Arctic explorers only survived thanks to adopting Inuit clothing, travel methods, and shelter building techniques, including igloo construction. The spirit of ingenuity in the face of extreme adversity, which the igloo so perfectly embodies, remains a powerful source of inspiration. It demonstrates human resilience and our capacity to find creative solutions to seemingly insurmountable challenges. In a world facing climate change, resource scarcity, and other global crises, that spirit of innovative adaptation is more crucial than ever. The igloo whispers a timeless message across the snows, with understanding, respect for nature, and a willingness to learn from ancient wisdom. Even the harshest environments can be transformed into a place of home. The frozen legacy of the igloo continues to offer warmth, not just in a physical sense, but in the enduring power of its ideas. And so, as the Arctic twilight deepens, casting long, ethereal shadows across the snow, we find ourselves at the end of our exploration into the world of the igloo. We've journeyed from the first principles of snow's insulative magic, through the meticulous craft of its construction, to the intricate dance of daily life and communal spirit it nurtured within its luminous walls. The igloo, more than just a shelter, stands as a profound symbol of human adaptability, a testament to the Inuit people's deep understanding of their formidable environment, and a beacon of ingenuity that continues to shine faintly, even as its everyday use has largely receded into the mists of cultural memory. Think back to that initial encounter with the raw, biting cold of the polar winter, the overwhelming silence, the seemingly featureless expanse of white, and then consider the almost alchemical transformation that occurs when snow, the very essence of that cold, is skillfully shaped into a dome of warmth and life. The elegance of the catenary curve, the ingenious cold trap of the entrance tunnel, the life-giving glow of the Qulliq. Each element speaks of generations of observation, refinement, and an intuitive grasp of physics that would impress any modern engineer. It's a structure born not from blueprints and CAD programs, but from an intimate, hands-on dialogue with the materials and forces of the Arctic world. It's like nature itself whispered the design into the ears of those who are willing to listen closely. The hunter, setting out across the frozen sea ice, carried with him not just his harpoon and his dogs, but the vital knowledge that he could create a sanctuary for himself wherever he found suitable snow. This ability extended his reach, his endurance, his very capacity to provide. The igloo was his partner in the hunt, his shield against the sudden storm, his temporary home in a vast and often unforgiving wilderness. Inside its walls, strategies were planned, stories were shared, and the bonds of camaraderie were strengthened, all while the wind howled harmlessly outside. For the family, the igloo was the heart of winter life. On raised platforms covered with warm caribou furs, children slept soundly, elders recounted ancient tales, and women skillfully sewed the clothing that provided the first line of defence against the cold. The Qulliq flame, tended with care, was the centre of this domestic universe, providing not just physical warmth and light, but also a focal point for family connection and the continuity of tradition. Even the interconnected snow villages, the Qaggiq ceremonial houses buzzing with song and dance, demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of how to build not just shelter, but community, woven into the very fabric of the winter landscape. We've touched upon the subtle dangers, the careful balancing act of ventilation and heat, and the profound spiritual meanings woven into the igloo's snowy fabric. It was a holistic creation, where the practical and the sacred were not separate but deeply intertwined. And as the 20th century brought waves of change, the igloo's role began to shift, yet its echoes linger, reminding us of the enduring wisdom held within traditional ways of knowing and living in harmony with the earth. Historians still marvel at the sheer resilience of a culture that could thrive for millennia in such an extreme climb, with the snow house as one of its most iconic and vital innovations. The legacy of the igloo is not just in the physical structure, but in the spirit of resourcefulness, respect for nature, and profound adaptability it represents. It's a legacy written in snow, yes, but its warmth and wisdom are anything but fleeting. And now, as our own journey through the long Arctic night comes to a gentle close, Allow the image of that solitary dome glowing softly under the aurora-lit sky to settle in your mind. Picture the faint plume of warmth rising from its ventilation hole, a quiet signal of life and resilience in the heart of the frozen world. The snow house, a simple yet profound creation, offered more than just shelter from the cold. It nursed hunters, cradled families, and sustained a vibrant culture through the darkest of winters. It stands as a timeless reminder that even in the most challenging conditions, human ingenuity, community, and a deep connection to the natural world can create not just survival, but a place of warmth, story, and enduring spirit. The air in the igloo grows still now. The last stories of the evening have been told, and the soft glow of the Qulliq is turned down to a gentle ember, conserving its precious fuel for the night ahead. Outside, the wind may still whisper its ancient secrets across the endless snows, but within these gently curved walls there is a profound and encompassing peace. The children are asleep, nestled deep in the warm furs, their dreams perhaps filled with dancing spirits and successful hunts. The hunters rest, their bodies tired but their spirits content, ready for what the new day or the continued polar night may bring. You feel the gentle, radiant warmth that has been so carefully cultivated, a soft caress against the memory of the biting cold. The silence within the snow house is different now, no longer the stark, empty silence of the open tundra, but a silence filled with the soft breaths of slumber, the quiet assurance of shared shelter, and the deep resonant peace of a home well earned from the very elements that define this world. Let that sense of quiet security envelop you. The challenges of the day have faded, replaced by the simple, profound comfort of warmth, safety, and rest. The snow walls, which once stood as individual sharp-edged blocks, have now merged into a seamless protective embrace, their icy crystals holding back the vastness of the Arctic night, allowing this small haven of life to flourish. Sweet dreams,